And I could tell in his voice that he sounded almost worried. And so I was angry. He wasn't coming. I'd looked forward to him literally coming and showing up with me and trying to help me figure out what exactly I should do with this situation. And I went out to the garage. I started to fold up the table and put the chair away and took the light away. And I heard this sound. I heard this kind of rubbing or scratching sound that sounded like it was coming from behind the freezer. And I thought, well, it's the compressor. It's an older freezer, and maybe the compressor motor is starting to fail, or the bearings are failing on the motor. And this rubbing, scratching sound, but it wasn't consistent. It would make this sound and then it would stop. And I thought, well, if the compressor's broken, then the freezer will show that it's not freezing by the indicator, the thermometer that's on the inside of the door of the freezer. And so I'd opened it many times, and I went over and I just lifted the lid to look at the thermometer. And all of a sudden, at that moment, this little creature, sat up, rolled its head back with its eyes wide open, and screamed at me so hard that it felt like it was forcing the air right out of my chest, pushing me back almost against the wall of the garage. And I was just scared out of my mind. I mean, I thought, okay, this thing's going to kill me now. It's half alive. It's got a wound that's bleeding from its head, and now it's going to kill me. I literally let go of the top of the freezer as I backed up and felt this against my chest and ran for the house, because I figured it's going to kill me. And that's what I felt. That's what I did. That's exactly what happened. I was in the house. I thought, well, maybe it'll run away. The door was wide open to the garage. It could have run away. And I called my friend. I called him and said, Gary, we have a bigger problem. And he came over, and I said, it's alive. And he didn't believe me. He thought he says, you're pulling my leg. That isn't what he said, but he didn't believe me. And I said, I'll show you. Come with me. And I went back to the garage, and I opened it, and it sat up and screamed again. And he literally felt the same thing I did the first time around. He felt the pressure of the scream, almost like the air became a force that literally pushed you back. And then we both watched as it just set back down in the freezer, and literally the weight of the door of the freezer closed right slowly on top of its head. It stayed in the freezer. Why? I don't know. Did it like the cold? Was it comfortable? Did it feel safe? I don't know. But it stayed there. And it was quiet once the door was closed. We ran for the house. Both of us ran for the house. And we sat and literally in silence for, 15 minutes before he just started babbling, saying, oh my God, it's alive, it's alive. And I don't know. I don't know what happened during that next hour. I mean, we talked. There was no planning made. It was just, I think we were just supporting each other's shock and hoping maybe it would run away. But it didn't. It stayed. It stayed in the freezer. And hours later, I went back out. I went back out timidly and kind of brushed against the side of the freezer to see if I could hear it moving, or if it was, it was like an animal trapped in a box that had a big wound in its head that I inflicted. And I figured it's going to kill me. It's going to come out and attack me the way I attacked it. Well, it didn't. Because I opened the freezer and it literally slowly grabbed the side of the freezer and pulled its head up, and with these huge, big, almond-shaped eyes just looked at me in a very curious way, very afraid way, and then just sat back down. and the freezer door was open. It was open. It could have jumped out. It could have ran away. The door to the garage was open, because I certainly didn't want to be locked in a room with this thing. And I had totally even planned for it to run out. But it didn't. It stayed. And I felt different. Somehow, in that moment, I felt different. I felt like this was an animal or a living being that was hurt, that was damaged. I could tell that it wasn't in the best of shape. I knew what the wound looked like. I knew what I had inflicted. I had been opening the skull, this skull flap, with this wound for 2 days, showing other people, examining the body, cutting a piece of the tissue out, taking it for sampling. I knew what was in my hands was tangible. I knew that it was a real thing. But now it was breathing and screaming and moving and looking at me, but not hurting me. And I felt different. I felt like maybe it needs some help. Maybe because I spent so much time in hospitals in my past. Maybe I spent time trying to be empathetic for people who were sick. I don't know. I don't have that answer. I didn't have, any big plan to try to heal it. I wanted it to run away. But it didn't. It stayed. And as I stayed longer with it, and it again would open the freezer, or I would open the freezer slightly, and it would come out of the freezer. It would literally raise up itself further and further to where I could first see its whole head, and then its neck, and then finally it would get out of the freezer by itself when I would open the lid, and it would sit on the floor right next to the freezer and rock back and forth and look at me, gaze directly into my eyes, as if it was either saying, "Don't hurt me," or if it was saying, "Help me." I don't know. But it didn't seem to be screaming. It didn't seem to be violent. It seemed to be very passive and very, very gentle. So in my mind, something changed in its demeanor. Because now it almost made me feel gentle. It made me feel at ease. And no longer was I so traumatized by it. Now, some people will speculate and they'll say, well, this creature telepathically created an euphoria within your mind to calm you down. That's possible. That is very possible. Because later on, I realized it had tremendous telepathy. It could take images out of my mind from my own past, my own history, and replay them like a movie back to me, like a DVD of my past when I was a little child. I could smell the grass. I could feel the wind on my arms when I was that child. The most technicolor movie I've ever experienced in my mind, sitting in front of this little creature. But it didn't do that all the time. Sometimes it put thoughts in my mind that I couldn't decipher, I couldn't discern, images of geometric shapes and strange structures, and even smells and tastes that I could experience. But I didn't know what it meant. I didn't know what any of this meant. And it would come so fast that it was like being bombarded with a fire hose of information. I actually, literally would say, "No, slow down, slow down." And it, would slow down. So that became a way of communication. That became the process of learning how to accept what was now in front of me and literally controlling me at the moment. Because it could paralyze you. It could actually make you stand still so you couldn't move. Your muscles in your legs would actually not move. I think this was a defense mechanism. I think it didn't want me to hurt it again. Or it didn't want me to hurt myself. I don't know. But we actually began to communicate this way by exchanging